The mountain air smelled of pine and freedom, and for Ethan, that little barn on the ridge wasn't just a building, it was a dream, a place where he could work wood, store tools, and plan for the quiet life he had been chasing for years. Every evening, he'd sit on the porch of his small cabin, coffee steaming in his hands, watching the sun dip behind the peaks, painting the sky in shades of fire. But peace rarely lasts when greed knocks at the door. Karen Mitchell, the self-proclaimed queen of the nearby Lakefront resort, had her eyes set on that ridge for years. She wanted the view, the land, and the water that flowed from the mountain stream right through Ethan's property, the same stream that fed her resort's pristine lake. Ethan had heard whispers from locals. "Don't cross Karen. She always gets what she wants." But he wasn't worried. His land was his barn was his, and no HOA rule, no entitled demand could take that away, or so he thought. One morning, Ethan woke up to the unmistakable sound of machinery grinding in the distance. Heart pounding, he climbed the ridge trail and froze. His barn, his sanctuary, his dream, was nothing but splintered wood and dust. Ethan stood in stunned silence as the bulldozer crawled back down the hill. Karen, dressed in her signature bright blazer and oversized sunglasses, stood at the edge of the wreckage like a queen surveying conquered land. "This ridge was never yours," she said, her voice as sharp as the mountain wind. "Your little shack was an eyesore. Now it's gone. You're welcome." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He wasn't the man to shout or make a scene. He simply walked into what was left of his barn, picking up a piece of broken wood. His father's initials were carved into it, the same father who helped him build the place years ago. Karen mistook his silence for defeat. "Consider this a favor," she continued smugly. "And if you know what's good for you, you'll stay out of my way. This land is meant for better things, not your hobby." Her words stung, but Ethan kept his calm. In that moment, something shifted inside him. He didn't want revenge. Not yet. But he knew one thing. Karen had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Ethan spent the next few days buried in paperwork, deeds, surveys, and maps older than the resort itself. His father had taught him to know your land like the lines on your hand, and now that advice became his compass. And there it was. Clear as day, the ridge, the stream, the source, all legally his. Not just by paperwork, but by history, signed and sealed decades ago. Karen hadn't just bulldozed his barn, she'd trespassed and destroyed his property. But what caught his eye wasn't the barn or the ridge. It was the stream, the narrow vein of crystal water that started on his mountain and traveled straight into the heart of Karen's resort lake. Her fancy villas, her boating docks, her five-star restaurant, all of it thrived on water that wasn't hers. Ethan sat back in his chair, heart pounding. The law was on his side. The land was on his side. And now the mountain itself seemed to be whispering a plan. Quiet, clean, and absolutely devastating. Ethan didn't yell. He didn't storm into Karen's office. Instead, he worked quietly early in the mornings when no one was awake. He cleared debris, repaired fences, and set up a sturdy gate at the mouth of the stream. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't even dramatic. He simply did what any landowner had the right to do: protect his water source. By the end of the week, the once-free stream slowed to a trickle beyond his boundary. At first, Karen didn't notice. Her resort sparkled as usual. Her guests lounged by the lake, sipping cocktails. But by the fourth day, whispers started. The water level dipped and the lake's once glassy surface began to recede, exposing muddy banks and stranded docks. By the time Karen realized what had happened, Ethan was sitting on his porch, sipping coffee, watching her luxury SUVs race up the mountain road. For the first time since his barn was destroyed, he smiled. Karen stormed onto Ethan's land, her heels sinking into the soft mountain soil. "What do you think you're doing?" she screamed, pointing at the gate across the stream. Ethan didn't move. "Protecting my property," he said calmly. "You can't just cut off the water. My resort depends on that stream." "And my barn depended on you respecting my boundary," he replied, his voice steady, almost gentle. "Funny how that works, isn't it?" Karen's face turned red. For years, she had gotten her way with threats and bluster. But this quiet, unshakable man wasn't budging, and for the first time she realized she had underestimated him. Word spread fast. Locals who had once been silent started to cheer him on. About time someone stood up to her, they said. The mountain, it seemed, had chosen its side. As the days turned into weeks, Karen's resort crumbled, not physically but financially. Guests canceled bookings. The lake, once the pride of the property, shrank into a muddy basin. Photos of the dying resort began circulating online, turning her empire into a cautionary tale. Ethan stayed quiet. He didn't gloat. He didn't brag. He just kept tending to his land, letting nature and time do what they always do. Reveal the truth. Karen tried everything. Lawyers, county officials, even media pressure. But every document, every map, every law pointed to the same undeniable fact. The mountain and its stream belonged to Ethan. She had no claim, no power, and no way to rebuild the trust she'd shattered. By spring, the barn was rebuilt, stronger, warmer, and standing tall on the ridge where it belonged. Ethan worked with his own hands, every nail and board a quiet declaration that he hadn't been broken. The stream still flowed, but now it did so on his terms. He allowed a small, steady flow to keep the valley alive. But the days of Karen's unchecked greed were over. Sometimes, when the sky turned gold in the evening, Ethan would sit on the porch and watch the ridge glow. Peace had returned, not because he fought louder, but because he stood his ground, calm and unshaken. Down in the valley, the resort remained a ghost of its former self. And while Karen's name faded from the mountain stories, Ethan's became something else entirely. A quiet legend of patience, resolve, and the simple power of knowing when to let the mountain speak for you.